Welcome to Florida. Finally made it all the way down the East Coast. For the first part of our Florida adventures, we went to the Castello De San Marcos. This is the oldest stone fort in the U.S. It was built between 1672 and 1695. Its home is here at St Augustine. St Augustine was founded by the Spaniards in 1565. The fort was built because the British started to move into the Carolina area and started to encroach on the Spanish claim to the Florida area. In 1702, the British invaded St. Augustine and burned it to the ground. This whole fort is made out of coquina stone. There's a story at the fort that goes that at times when the fort was attacked, the enemy cannonball would stick in the almost spongy stone, and the soldiers would pry it out of the stone and fire it back at them. I didn't really look for it, but I didn't see any indentations in any of the stone to indicate that. But it is really neat looking stone. It's made up of crushed seashells that have been compressed over time and turned into big blocks of stone. Still just amazing how old this fort is and how intact it still is. Once this fort was completed, it never fell in combat, though it did change hands multiple times. In 1763, the British took over the fort and renamed it Fort St. Mark. In 1783, the British returned the fort to the Spaniards. After the American Revolution, the Spaniards gained control of Florida again. In the 1820s, the U.S. received the fort and called it Fort Marion. For a brief time, 1861 and 62, the Confederates controlled the fort before it got back into national American control. And in 1942 through 45, it was used as a Coast Guard training base. This coat of arms was actually put on the fort back in the 1700s. It was removed for safekeeping and placed in the fort itself where it has better protection. And these Sally Port doors were built by America in 1821. And they were removed for safekeeping. This is the oldest continuously lived-in settlement in America, founded in 1565. That's just crazy. They had some really neat displays in the fort, showing officers' quarters, soldiers' barracks, supply rooms. Pretty impressive how old the fort is, and that it was attacked several times. It never fell in battle. Also kind of amazing how broad the fort is, with how many different rooms and how much storage and how many barracks they had for people. Even though the soldiers, at least back in the Spanish days, would live out in town, you do rotating guard duty. And if you were on guard duty, you spent 24 hours at the fort. So you only slept at the fort if you were on guard duty. Of course, some of that changed because, like, when the fort was attacked in the 1702 by the British, a lot of the families were moved into the fort walls because the British came through and literally burned St Augustine to the ground in 1702. One thing that got us when we were looking at some of this stuff is a lot of these cannons date back to the 1600s. There's one cannon we'll see later that they can look at the manufacture date and they know it's 1620 something. But what gets me is the ornate details put into these big, huge, heavy cannons. It's just amazing to see all of the ornate carvings and scroll work, and just amazing what they could do 400 or 500 years ago. The fort was pretty amazing and lots of fun to explore. What that furnace is at the bottom you see there is a hot shot furnace. And this waterfront wall was actually an extension that was added by the Americans in the early 1800s. And that hot shot, they could heat up cannonballs. So if warships would come in to attack the fort, they could heat up the cannonballs. And if the cannonballs successfully hit the ship, because of how glowing red hot they were from the hot shot furnace, they would catch the ships on fire to do more damage than just the hitting of the cannonball. Really quite interesting when you get up on the top here, how deep those outside walls are of the fort. And just how much stone and earth there are to shield the soldiers from attack when the fort was under attack. And after the city was attacked in the early 1700s, they decided to build a wall to protect the city, and you can see part of it extending away from the fort there. They built a wall to completely surround the entire town to help protect it from future attacks. Just look at all that detail. The visitor center in St. Augustine had a lot of neat displays. They had some archaeological finds that had been discovered in the area, and lots of neat historical information, pictures or copies of old maps of the city or the fort. Lots of really neat information. You can kind of see in that drawing the forts in the lower right, and then you can see the drawings of where the wall used to be to protect the city after it was attacked. Been to so many different museums and visitor centers, and some of these modeled ships are just amazing in their detail and accuracy. One of these days I might try my hand at that and build me a USS Constitution. So the city gate, they have some wood there as well. In 1739, they built a wooden fence around, and then this stone gate was built in 1808 as an upgrade to help protect the city. Crazy to think that those gates have been standing there for over 200 years. Then we did a walk down St. George Street, and this is the oldest wooden schoolhouse. The chains you see on the sides of it there, they were added in 1937 to help during hurricane-forced winds. So they don't have an exact date when this school was built, because in 1702 they know the whole town was burned down by the British. But they have records to show that this school was present in 1716. So somewhere between 1702 and 1716 was when that school was built. We weren't able to go inside, but they do have old 1700s school textbooks and other school-related items that you could go look at. This is the St. Photios Shrine. It's a Greek Orthodox church. It's actually in the Avero House. The house itself was built around 1749. The house was bought in 1966 by the Greek Orthodox Church and then restored to its 1700s appearance. The paintings were just amazing. It was just almost in awe of the detail work, and just real fascinated about the whole process. And this is the government house. Government house, the east wing was built between 1706 and 1713. It was used by a lot of different governors of St. Augustine. Daniel Boone visited it. Other folks from the Revolutionary period visited while it was still in Spanish hands. It was rebuilt in 1833, 1834 by the U.S. When the U.S. got it, it was in pretty bad shape, so the outside walls were still original, but the whole inside was completely redone. And they added a wing in 1937 because it had become the customs house, post office, and other government offices, and they were just getting big enough as a city that they couldn't contain it in the original East Wing. Just amazing the age of things and the history in some of these places you just don't see on the West Coast at all. Then as a NASCAR fan, I really wanted to go see Daytona Speedway. This is a big one. Every year the season starts out with a Daytona 500. And this is where it's held at. Mr. France was the one that concocted this idea, and it just amazes me that the racetrack really has not changed too much from when it was first built in 1959. 1959 was the first year for the Daytona 500. It just kind of boggles my mind of going back that far in NASCAR history. Kind of a neat little display they had out on the sidewalk, winning drivers' handprints, footprints, and signatures. So the configuration of the track really hasn't changed much since it opened. It's a 2.5 mile high-speed oval. It had lights installed in 1998. It's been repaved in 1978 and then again in 2010. I mean, a lot of people can consider this the birthplace of American racing. So that 999 car there was built by Henry Ford and another race car driver. It was built in 1902, and for a short time it held the land speed record at 91.37 miles per hour. It just amazes me when you look at some of the speeds that were done that long ago. There's another car present that I think was from 1920s or 30s, and it broke like 300 miles an hour, and I didn't realize it had gone that fast that long ago. This is kind of a cool picture. The paved part of that is the A1A highway there in Florida on Daytona Beach. And in the 30s all the way up to the 1950s, before they started using Daytona Raceway, they would race, and the inner straight was the A1A highway and the outer straight was the beach. So they went from sand to asphalt to sand every lap. And that's where the original Daytona Raceway was. They used the public highway and the public beach. Then we did actually go out and drive part of the A1A highway, which was neat, knowing that the highway has such history. Even for a time there on the Daytona Beach, they would have land speed records being raced out there. But for safety reasons and other reasons, they had to stop doing that. These are some original pictures of them constructing the racetrack in 58, 59. And it just amazes me. I mean, they have 31-degree banking in the corners. And when it opened in 1959, that's how it was. It was really neat to see some of these original pictures of when they actually built the racetrack. And the fact that the configuration hasn't really changed much at all. There's just such a history of racing in this area, in all forms of racing. Airplanes, motorcycles, land speed records, NASCAR. This area is just so much more than just NASCAR. Here's some of the historical winners of the Daytona 500. Such a huge, prestigious race. It was kind of neat seeing the historical changes in the protective suits that drivers wore. Because until this time, they weren't fireproof. And then the Nomex suits that came out were a big deal. The 34 car, I think Daytona does something kind of cool. The winner of the Daytona 500 every year has their car right from the racetrack put in their museum, and it stays there until the next Daytona 500. And this is Michael McDowell's number 34. You can still see the 100-mile-an-hour tape on his left side there, or excuse me, right side, that was put on during the race. This is kind of cool. They had a replica of the movie car, the fabulous Hudson Hornet, and right across the way was the original fabulous Hudson Hornet that actually raced in NASCAR. Kind of neat to see them both side by side like that. Just amazing, again, the racing history that's in here. That went 406 mile an hour all the way back in 1960. This is Rusty Wallace's final race car when he retired. You can see one of Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s number 3 up there on the wall. Old Indy cars, Formula One, dragsters. That kind of gives you an idea of the 31-degree banking. Kind of interesting, you look at some of those cars on the banking and they're not sitting level with the track, but when they're at high speeds with the downforce, it's not the case when they're actually at race speeds. Lots of neat history though. We had a good time.